See, that's not me. There I am. It's Friday! There's Rob Zena saying, it's been truly a strange week. You have no idea. I'm back. We are live. We are in the Nutmeg Tavern and not at some strange location in a who knows where. It's been a truly weird day, but hey, this is going to be a great live stream. Lauren said, why don't you talk about your trip? You know, and I got to talk about the trip in a little tiny live stream last Friday, but we're going to go way in depth, and we're going to, of course, lock this into historical context and all that good stuff. I'm your host, John Townsend. We're going to be talking about 18th century stuff, maybe even some 21st century stuff. I am joined on the other side of the time vortex by ethereal voices. Lauren is in the chat.
Hello. And
Will is on the console.
Hello.
You'll be seeing pictures of Ivy, but she is preparing something else right at the moment. So we have Will filling in. Thank you, Will, for being willing to fill in. I see folks from not even all over the colonies, but all over the world checking into the chat. If you're from a far away or even close, definitely tell us where you're at so that everybody can go, wow, because it's probably one of the coolest things about the chat. We had a special thank you to all the folks who came by at Martin Station, shook hands, were excited, chatted. I talked to people, and I talked to some more people. And it's always great to check in with the people we see there year after year, whether they're participants or members of just the audience people or whatever. So we just had a heck of a time, like we always do, going down to Martin Station. It's a beautiful location in a beautiful spot, in a larger beautiful spot, and it is worthy of visiting. And you will see some pictures today, and we will discuss some of those great, wonderful things that are in that location. Is there anything I need to fill people into about anything other than talk? Maybe we'll think about something as we go. But the region we're talking about here is Cumberland Gap. It's at the point where Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky, and I think even another state get really close together. Right, and right there along the borders, and a fascinating spot to study the history of, even geologically, and the cultures that come through there. It is a way station and a sort of a bottleneck where lots of history flows through this spot. So it is highly interesting. What I'm going to do is jump in and look at the pictures. I'm going to describe them. And then I have here some excerpts out of the Journal of Exploration in the spring of the year 1750 by Dr. Thomas Walker. And he is going through this area and exploring in 1750. That's early. This is 25 years earlier than Cresswell as he's coming down from Pittsburgh into the Kentucky River. And I mean, the traces of these two things are fairly close together when they get to their most interior point. But this is a lot earlier and from the other direction, not from the north, but from the south. So let me jump in and talk about some of these pictures really quick. That's not the picture I want. Where is the beginning? There's the beginning. This is the thumbnail image that we used, done in the 1870s or 1880s. This is supposed to be Daniel Boone leading a group of settlers through the Cumberland Gap. And this is hostile, dangerous territory, not just because of Native Americans, but because of the terrain, because of animals falling off of mountains, the weather. It's just like, it is a scary place to be. So we've got people traveling through there a lot of times. Later on, they create the road wide enough for wagons to go through, but for quite a while, it's just a skinny little trail. sometimes even too hard for horses to travel. And it's just like people on foot, depending on exactly where you're at. The whole point of the gap is that it was wide enough and easy enough spot to get through the mountains that you could do more than just a person with a rope, getting through, right? So you can bring horses through, you can bring wagons through as you widen the road. The important part of history, I don't know, we really think about it too much these days, right? But super important. This is a image that was done in the 1850s, I believe. And you can get a concept of what's going on with the gap here. So you can see in the middle-ish and all the way on the right-hand side, how the mountains are very, very rugged and almost some that definitely vertical faces at certain points where it is just beyond a person clambering up. It's just, and this wall of mountains goes for a long way. You could really see how people thought, there is no way around this. There's no realistic way around this until you get to this spot where the Cumberland Gap is, where there's a gap in the mountains. And, there's been, I don't know how recent, but sort of behind this gap area, it isn't like there's just one range of mountains that's a fence, but there are mountains and mountains after that. So if you keep going north, it's like if you got over the first one, it's like, you're Bilbo or you're Frodo, and it's like, what? They just keep going. There's just more mountains after this mountain. It's like that in this spot. But this particular location, there's this gap, and it seems like the modern scientific thought is that this right behind this gap area, there's kind of a basin, and it's where a meteor hit, and there's a crater. That's a crater spot. And that created water that would actually created the gap. And so it's a very, very interesting spot to investigate. This is sort of an image from, I'm trying to think about where we're at here. This is one of the overlook kind of spots where we took a picture, and you can, I believe what you're seeing there is back into that crater spot. Where that little road way in the background, I believe that's the town of Middlesbrough, that's sort of in that crater location. They have a little airport back there, and there's Fern Lake, I believe, off to the side there. So that's in the sort of the mountains that are behind this one mountain range. We hiked up to the gap itself, which has been restored in the, I don't know when they created it as a highway, but it was a highway up until like 1995. And then they decided to make a tunnel and restore the gap to its original state that you would find it if you were Dr. Thomas Walker in 1750. So they ripped out the road and they planted trees and they made it back to the way the gap was originally. And there's a giant tunnel there, like a mile or two away, that replaces where the highway was. And one of the reasons why they also replaced it with the tunnel was because even when it was the Gap Highway, it was dangerous. 5 people a year would die driving that dangerous little skinny highway between the mountains. This is one of these, this is really close to the pinnacle. There's an overlook that is right at the tippy edge. As we looked at that gap picture earlier, you can kind of see there's a bluff. This is the very top of that. There are these sort of rock things that just stick out of the ground. It's crazy. This one is all tilted over. That's a kind of semi-straight up and down. But this is right up at the pinnacle. And do I have any? Nope. So this was taken, and we were basically in the clouds. There's a beautiful overlook here. This is a spot in the Cumberland National Park that you can drive to. There's a parking lot up there, and you can easily get to this spot in this beautiful multiple overlook spot. Ivy and I have this particular morning. It was Thursday morning. We climbed, like 3 or 4 miles. We hiked up to the pinnacle instead of driving up there. We're standing on the pinnacle in the fog. No one's up there. It's quiet. You can't see anything except for, rocks and clouds, basically. And we were enjoying our time alone up there. We thought it was very funny that, it's a national park. There's nobody around. We hear someone walking to the spot down the path. We think, oh no, we're going to have to share this beautiful spot. And then out of the fog comes Tim Williams and his wife, who we haven't seen for 3 years, and because he had health issues and he wasn't able to come last year, and it was amazing to greet friends after 3 years in a giant cloud.
Right, you thought you were all alone? Nope, here comes a couple of
It was
friends.
amazing to do that. So this is that overlook spot. Very close to the overlook spot. This is on another trail. This is a spring that comes right out of the side of the mountain. And Dr. Thomas Walker will talk about this spring. It's a spot you can hike to. Very, very short hike. It's a little difficult to get down where she's at here, but you can hear the water, the water flowing and all this stream. And this is just right outside of not this cave, but where is Gap Cave? Where is it? It's not here. I don't have a picture of Gap Cave. Gap Cave is just on this trail. Gap Cave you can get a tour of at this time of year. It's closed other parts of the year because of bat hibernation, but they'll take you on a tour. We didn't get to go on the tour of Gap Cave, but it made us say, hey, we need to check out other caves. Later on that same day, we hiked up to Skylight Cave, which is about a little over half a mile of hiking. This is inside of Skylight Cave. And this cave isn't giant by some cave standards when you go on cave tours, but it's totally unrestricted. You just walk right in. Just have fun. No tours, no nothing. You just get out your flashlight and have fun. This is sort of in the middle. You can see all the rocks have collapsed out of that dome and fallen down into the middle of it. But you can keep exploring it. This is a view from a little bit behind that, and you can see why it's called Skylight Cave. So that green light that's coming in, that's from the main entrance. And there's this skylight, this upper entrance, maybe 75 or 100 feet higher. And the light comes down and just pours down this little trail, and is one of the most beautiful sights ever. When to see this in its real, it was just, let me tell you, it was really cool. Okay, you can continue to explore back that cave. It kind of just kept on going. It got smaller and smaller, but there are some beautiful rock formations in there. So this is like a rim formation where the water builds up and then the minerals flow over the top, and it sort of builds higher and higher little walls, like little mud walls, except it's rock. So you got all these rock formations back there. The next day, we were going to do it the same day. After we saw Skylight Cave, we said, well, we got to see if there are any more caves. And there was another cave called Sand Cave, and we said, well, we'll go to that. We drove all the way to the place, to the trailhead, and you can only hike to it. And we realized it was much too late in the day to start it. It would take hours to get there. So we said, okay, we're going to take Friday off from the event. We're going to go hiking. So this is very close to Sand Cave. It's called the White Rocks, and it is a huge bluff that you can hike to, and you can see out way over the top of this. Apparently on a clear day, you can see clear down to the Smoky Mountains from a spot like this. This is even seemingly a little higher up than Pinnacle Rock. And there is ivy standing on the top. And let me tell you, you don't want to get close to the edge. It's very scary. Like, wow, that's a long way down. Beautiful spot. It really, really reminded me of being in Maine, climbing up on top of Bubble Rock that's in Acadia National Park. And again, this park, there are no like, you want to go hiking? There aren't any fees, anything. You just go.
Although, if you want a map, you
got to pay for a map.
You probably do want the map.
Well, yeah.
I don't know. I feel
the topographical map that they sell you is worth it.
And I also love maps as souvenirs, as a reminder of the trips.
If you ask for they do have some free maps at the visitor center. You have to probably ask for them, but they'll give you some trail maps to help you find your way on some of the trails. But a lot of these, there's like safety features. We don't need any of that stuff. You just climb up there and good luck with that and don't die. That's the safety feature. Don't jump off of that. This is a location between Bluff, the White Rocks, and Sand Caves. About a mile between those two. And this looks like, okay, that's an interesting looking rock. It's crazy rock formation. You can see how it's on top of a mountain, but it's all eroded by water, like it was from a river or something. And you're thinking, okay, how does that get up here? But we're walking the trail, we're looking at that. And then I said, well, it's hard to get an idea of the size of that. So I took another picture. See down at the bottom there in the middle? That's ivy standing by it. So you can get a scale of the size of that.
I did a great job providing scale in a lot of these pictures.
That is not little. That is really, really, really big. Huge, giant, very interesting rock formations. This is at the base of Sand Cave. This is a stream. It's all filled with rhododendron, and the stream bed is all polished quartz pebbles, about the size of a small marble, but usually oblong, white, and just polished like you put them in a rock polisher and tumbled them in sand. There's the waterfall, and you can see the way the stream is kind of churned up, or the way it looks. And right off to the right-hand side there is the cave opening, and there's a waterfall. Yeah, water's coming down, John. Good job. But that's tall. It's like 50, 60 feet tall. It's a pretty cool waterfall. Here's the entrance to Sand Cave. It's a bit more of a rock overhang. This is huge. It's much larger than a football field, and it's all filled with sand, right? This is really big. As you can kind of get an idea from all this is all, and the sand isn't washed up necessarily, but it's this rock that has disintegrated into the sand, at least I believe. There's a picture for scale. You can see how big that cave opening is. None of those pockets go back very far at all. It's really like a huge rock overhang. I believe we're going to see reference to that in our Thomas Walker stuff. Here's Ivy looking at those polished. They don't look as polished as they are, but in reality, all those little stones are very, very smooth and polished up. And there's Ivy at the event. Okay, so there we go. Let's read some about what's going on with this. The Journal of an Exploration in the Year of the Spring, 1750, Dr. Thomas Walker. Dr. Thomas Walker is going, he's from Virginia. He's going from the Virginia area, and he's going to travel up to the Gap area, and he's going to go through the Gap and through the middle of Kentucky and then back around to Virginia. And he does this from, say, April into July. Very, very similar to Cresswell in that, he kind of starts off at the same time of the year. They go, and then, they end up back. And the entries are kind of similar too. So here's a fairly early entry, just as they're leaving sort of pseudo-civilization or, the back country and trying to get into the wilderness itself. And I'm just going to pick out these excerpts, different things and there's a link to this book in the description, right?
Yes, and I dropped it in the chat a couple.
And dropped it in the chat. Here we go. This is March 17th, something like that. And he says they're like jumping off from backcountry where people actually live into the wilderness. And he talks about one person who's living there, and then he talks about this other whole religious sect that has a little sort of pseudo colony, right? The Dunkards are an odd set of people who make it a matter of religion not to shave their beards, lie on beds, or eat flesh, though at present in the last they transgress, being constrained to it, as they say, by the want of a sufficiency of grain and roots. They having not long been seated here, I doubt the plenty and deliciousness of the venison and turkeys has contributed not a little to this. The unmarried have no private property, but live on a common stock. They don't baptize, either young or old. They keep their Sabbath on a Saturday, and hold that all men should be happy hereafter, but first must pass through punishment according to their sins. They are very hospitable. So, interesting, he's just running into a set of people, and he's bothering to take the time to give us a description of this. And we've got other, people that go into this area sort of for religious freedom situations. The folks at the Moravians down in Pennsylvania and in North Carolina, and situations like that. People run into them and describe it. Here we go. We kept down Holston's River for about 4 miles and camped, and then Mr. Powell and I went to look for Samuel Stalnaker, who I was informed has just moved out to settle. We found his camp and returned to our own this evening, and then the next day we went to Stalnaker's and helped him raise his house and camped about a quarter of a mile away. So somebody's settling in that area, and they go and help him put their...
I thought that was well, we took some time off from our trip, helped him with his house.
I put the roof on or whatever, pretty interesting. He wanted Stalnaker to help him because he was very familiar with the area, to pilot him in the area. In other words, be a guide, to scout for him, but he was his affairs were too busy and he wasn't able to do that, so they had to do it on their own. Here we go, April 3rd, 2nd and 3rd. We left Holston and traveled through small hills until about noon, when one of our horses, being choked by eating reeds too greedily, we stopped, having traveled 7 miles. Our horses being recovered, we traveled to the rocky ridge. I went up to the top to look for a pass, but found it so rocky that I concluded not to attempt it here. This ridge may be known by sight at a distance. To the eastward are many small mountains, and a buffalo road passed between them and the ridge. The growth is pine on top, and the rocks look white at a distance. We went 7 miles this day. This very well could be white rocks. So one of those overlooks you saw was taken from the top of white rocks. So it's quite likely that that's the spot he was talking about.
This horse they're talking about is reminding me of Sky.
Yeah. Ate too much. He talks about taking care of his horses. Let's see, April 6th, a couple days later. It proving wet, we did not move. Then the next day, we rode 8 miles over broken land. It snowed most of the day. Thought that was pretty interesting. It's snowing here.
What's the date again?
April 7th, and they're at the... Yeah. In the evening, our dogs caught a large he-bear, which before we could come up to shoot him, had wounded a dog of mine so that he could not travel, and we carried him on horseback till he recovered. Dogs and horses are really important to this expedition. And a lot of times we just don't think about pets on the frontier, right? But the dogs are an important part of this whole excursion. As well as in Cresswell, he talks about, most of the time he doesn't talk about the other people or whatever, horses or anything, but it's like, boom, every once in a while dogs sort of show up in the story. So here he talks about taking care of his dog. We could not find a ford shallow enough to carry our baggage over on our horses. Ambrose Powell forded over on one horse, and we drove the others after him. We then made a raft and carried over one load of baggage. When the raft was brought back, it was so heavy that it would not carry anything more dry. We waded and carried the remainder of our baggage on our shoulders at 2 turns over the river, which was about 130 yards wide. We went on about 5 miles and camped on Small Branch. This was April 10th. Like, it snowed a couple of days earlier. Can you imagine being this high in a river 130 yards broad and the snow's melting? He didn't talk about how cold they were, but yikes. So there's a gap in the narrative from April 10th to April 20th. That's probably the most important part of the story. That's when they're traveling through Cumberland Gap.
They were too busy to write.
No, I believe what happened was that part of this particular manuscript is so important that it was separated.
Oh, yes.
And so it's not in this book, but there is at least one entry I have from that gap. Let me see if I can find it. Yes. So I believe this was on the 13th. We went 4 miles to a large creek, which is called Cedar or Indian Creek, being a branch of Bear Grass. And from thence 6 miles to Cave Gap. That's the Cumberland Gap. It was called Cave Gap because there was a cave there, which is called Gap Cave. The land being level. On the north side of the gap is a large spring. We saw that in the slideshow. Ivy looking up from the water. Which falls very fast, and just above the spring is a small entrance to a large cave, Cujo Cavern, or now called Gap Cave, which the spring runs through, and there's a constant stream of cool air issuing out of it. The spring is sufficient to turn a mill just at the foot of the hills of Laurel Thicket, and the spring water runs through it. And on the south side is a plain Indian road. This gap may be seen a considerable distance. There is no other that I know of except about 2 miles to the north of it, which does not appear so low as the other. So it says here, so where he's talking about the cave, there's a constant stream of cool air issuing out of it. That was the one thing Ivy and I noticed immediately as we walked up to Gap Cave. There's cool air flowing out of it. 250, 300 years ago, somebody talks about this cool air coming out of this particular cave, and we went to other ones. No cool air was flowing out of it. But this cave is like it's a fan blowing the cold air out of it. It was amazing. Right there at the entrance to that cave. So that was the 13th. That's that part of that gap where he's talking about the cave, which we saw some pictures of. Here is a couple of days later. Having carried our baggage over in a bark canoe, they made a bark canoe, just like the one we did on the channel. We swam our horses and we all crossed the river. Then Ambrose Powell, Colby Chew, and I departed. So they split their company, knowing that they weren't all going to be able to go where they wanted to explore. Leaving the others to provide and salt some bear, build a house, and plant some peach stones and corn. So they sort of made a little plantation or a farm there, sort of pseudo-claiming the land. And he leaves those guys to sort of, you guys prepare camp and take care of all this stuff. We're going to keep going and exploring. Here is a section on April 26th where they went up the north side of the river 8 miles. They camped on a small branch, and a bear broke one of my dog's forelegs. And let's see what happened to the bear. Came out, hurt the dog, ran. I don't know what happened.
And still, while you were there were quite a few warnings about bears. Like, you didn't see any bears, but they're there.
In one of the gardens, they have these little garden plots outside the cabins at Martin Station. There were bear prints. There was fresh signs of black bear in the area, although we didn't see any, even though we hiked for a long time. So here's a spot. We just had bear 2 days later. We kept up the river to our company, whom we found all well, but the lame horse was as bad as we left him, and another had been bit on the nose by a snake. and he's a doctor. He takes care of the horses. The people I left had built a house 12 by 8, cleared and broke up some ground, planted some corn and peach stones. They also had killed several bears and cured the meat. This day, Colby Chew and his horse fell down the bank. I bled and gave him volatile drops, and he soon recovered. Probably because he's like, no more medicine for me.
I'm fine.
But notice they built a house 12 by 8. There are some people, I mean, you probably have a bathroom bigger than 12 by 8. That's very small house. The cabin we did was like 12 by 18 or something. So 12 by 8, really, they're building just tiny little cabin there. Here he's talking about his bitten horse is getting better. That's good. The tops of the mountains are very rocky, and some part of the rocks seem to be composed of shell, nuts, and other substances petrified and cemented together into a kind of flint. And we see different sorts of stones like that. And what we were noticing up in Sand Cave specifically is that rock that's been cemented together. I don't know if you remember us talking about being in St. Augustine, but they have a special rock there called cochina, which is compressed shells. And we saw a lot of not compressed shells, but sort of all those polished quartz stones that we found. They weren't polished in the water there. They were actually cemented into rocks that were part of the mountain. And as the rock deteriorated, all these little pieces of polished quartz would fall out of them. So very interesting. And he, of course, notes these things right here. He, on this same day in May, he says, we stayed on the river and we dressed elk skins to make Indian shoes, most of ours being quite worn out. This is one of the things we read about, how their shoes for the time period just were not made for this kind of travel. And so they wear out their shoes, and then they have to create replacement shoes. And the Native American moccasin design is the best choice. How you would go from wearing stiff soled leather shoes to moccasins and survive, I don't know, but they did. We left the river. We found the mountains very bad, got to a rock by the side of the creek, sufficient to shelter 200 men from the rain. Find it so convenient that we concluded to stay and put our elk skins in order for shoes and make them. Under the rock is a soft kind of stone, almost like alum in taste. Below it, a layer of coal about 12 inches thick and a white clay under that. I called the run Alum Creek. This could be Sand Cave or some formation like that. A rock overhang big enough for 200 men. I could easily see someone, saying, going to Sand Cave and saying, yeah, 200 people, easy. Our elk skin was prepared. We had lost every awl we brought out, and I made one out of a shank of an old fishing hook, and other people made 2 of horseshoe nails, and with these we made our moccasins, our shoes, or moccasins, as he says. Here he's saying, this is May 26th. We came down the branch, like creek or branch of the river, almost to the river and caught and up to a creek and then along the ridge till our dogs roused a large buck elk. Can you imagine elk? I don't think of elk being in that area, but elk, which we followed down to the creek. He killed Ambrose Powell's dog in the chase, and we named the run Tumbler's Creek, the dog being of that name. So there. A brave dog, or stupid one. It rained violently the latter part of the night till 9 o'clock. The branch is impassable at present. We lost a tomahawk and a can by the flood. And a can is like a tin mug or a very large mug. So they lost some of their equipment in the flood. because and when you're in the mountains like that, it rains someplace, maybe 100 miles away, and then whoosh, you get a flash flood, and again, more dangerous weather situations. June 13th. The tops of the ridges being so covered with ivy and the sides so steep and stony that we were obliged to cut our way through with our tomahawks. It's like going through a rainforest.
Well, in different spots where you were, compared to where we are, which is very, was almost completely deforested and kind of reforested. So any of our forests aren't very old, and we have harder winters. But from the pictures, that it looks almost semi-tropical in some of the kind of nooks and crannies.
Well, when we came out into that spot where the stones were all over the creek bed and the rhododendron, you felt like you were in Hawaii or someplace. It was very crazy looking. Here's July 8th. This is where they are back to civilization, or almost. Having shaved and shifted and made new shoes, we left our useless rags at the camp and got to Walker Johnson's about noon. So there we go. Finally, they're back in civilization.
Do you think that implies that they weren't shaving the whole time they were out on the trail? Because they're like, well, why bother?
They could have become part of that coal out there.
Yeah. Here we go. At the end of the journal, he writes, we killed in our journey 13 buffalo, 8 elk, 53 bear, 20 deer, 8 wild geese, and about 150 turkeys. Besides small game, we might have killed 3 times as much meat if we had wanted it. So they were only, it's like, well, I'm not gonna kill anything more than what they need. There we go. That was Thomas Walker's journal, and we get, again, some sense. Now, one of the points I want to make about the park as it stands, and Wilderness Road State Park, where Martin Station is, and specifically the Cumberland Gap National Park, and the situation that they've kind of restored this. So we've got all these trees and the trails and amazing rock formations and all this good stuff. It's rare that we can read a journal like Dr. Thomas Walker's explorations here, and we can go to that spot and it's still like that we can explore like Dr. Thomas Walker does. But right now you have that opportunity. You can read this journal and travel some of those same places and have almost exactly the same experience as he did, without there being a parking lot or a skyscraper or whatever. It's rare that we have those full situations. There's some of that, like for Lewis and Clark, right? So some of those places are probably still very similar to what it was like when Lewis and Clark were there. But for a sort of inland spot, we still have the ability to do it just like Dr. Thomas Walker does.
Although we'll pack slightly differently.
Yeah. And there's a trail where you're not going to get totally lost, and it's like, well, that you're going to go there, but it's not concreted pathway. Doesn't have handholds up the way, So better than Dr. Thomas Walker in some ways, but not ruined in a modern sense. So just wanted to say that. Every week I try to get to brand new Patreon and new and renewing YouTube members. How people support us this way can feel, I don't know, strange from either end. I'm always thankful that people say, boy, John, I like what you do, and so much that I'm willing to, just here, have a little bit of money. That is, that helps what we do and keeps us on track doing things, because what we do, well, it takes resources. So I want to thank these people and all the other people that do that, specifically, whether I mention your name or not. But new and renewing YouTube members this last week: Lou Cole, Adrian Impey, Hey Coolit, Nan Zingrone, Jassius Wise, Queen Huronia, Cana, Nona Lothorpe, Manuela Zorato, and then specifically for Patreon, Jonathan Lucas, thank you, and Mr. R.G. DeStolf. I remember that. He had some trouble there. He had to work. Come on, Patreon, make it happen. You got it. You got it figured. Thank you for your amazing support of what we do, and of course, all the folks that choose to support us by getting uber cool Nutmeg Tavern merch, which we have lots of fun things on our website, or other things on our website that maybe you need a tricorn hat. I know most people don't have a tricorn hat, and they probably need one. You can find them on our website. Okay, I've chatted.
Okay.
What have you?
All right. Okay, so I have a couple of super chats here. Let me get to them. Okay, so Mandatory Carry, working today, but thank you. I'll have to catch the rerun.
Thank you.
Bye. And then from Rob Dixon, hey John, great time seeing you, Ivy, Ryan, and Michael at the Martin Station.
Yes.
And then new Nutmeg Tavern member Kenny Lundstead. And then a super chat from Max Harcole. Amazing pics of the gap. It's so hard to capture depth and scale of things like this, and you all nailed it. It was really nice to kind of see some multiples of the same place from slightly different angles, because it helped with that. And Dad didn't show them, but there's a couple panoramic shots that you got that I thought.
The format
does
not
didn't work
lend itself to panoramic
no, it
shots.
didn't. But I was very fond of the panoramic.
And I took a bazillion pictures, and Ivy took a bazillion pictures, but we took them as family pictures, so I didn't want to, it's like, hey, let me open up my family album, let me show you, boring. So tried to pick the ones that were helpful.
The most geographically, because we really don't have a lot of caves here. We don't really have a lot of rock formations, so it's very fun to travel and get to see.
We have flat dirt formations.
Great for farming. Yeah. Excellent.
Not so much where they're at. You don't see fields and fields of corn because it's all mountains.
So here's a question that someone has. How did they dry their wash clothes on the frontier during winter, or did they just not wash for months on end?
Well, it's probably a little both. But you can basically freeze dry your clothes. So you just hang them up out there, and they freeze kind of hard like a board out there, but they will eventually dry. Things get very dry in the wintertime. If you noticed it inside your house, the moisture in the air just can't, when it's cold like that, everything condenses out. So even when things are sort of frozen and they're hard, the water's still in them, they will continue to dry even though they're frozen. So it works. It works. And maybe you take it inside and it melts, and you take it outside, it freezes again, but it's lost more moisture. So they'll dry out.
From what you usually hear people describing about trips, they probably are maybe washing their shirt. Just the undergarment. Yeah, and that might be the only thing they have a spare of.
Specifically time period clothes. They are not, the outer clothing, they don't bother to wash it. If it's a wool jacket, you don't wash it. It's bad for it. It'll ruin how it's put together. So you specifically have shirts and sometimes drawers that are for the washing, and they're made out of linen, and they just get softer and softer and feel better the more they're washed. But your linen waistcoat and your coat and all that you might comb it off or even beat it to get the dirt out of it, but you never washed them.
Oh no! It might fade it or something.
That's right.
Know.
You don't want to do that. You'll ruin your clothes.
So one of the things I was very interested in when you were talking about it was them losing their awls. Because the other day I had packed a bag and I had taken my work with me. I was putting a hat together. And I forgot my tools at home and I didn't put them in. And thankfully Ivy had a spare set. And I grabbed hers and I did it with hers. But sometimes you're doing a task and you need a specific tool. And if you don't have it, you're not going to get that task done.
Yeah, and the awls can be, I mean, basically it's a, it's a small ice pick. That's what you need when you're making your leather. You don't necessarily have a leather needle, so you use the awl to poke a hole through it, and then you can run the sinew or whatever kind of thread material you're using, or even, strips of leather, to run through it and tie it together, sew it together as it were. And the awls can be as simple as a little zigzag of metal, like a nail that's sharpened on both ends with a little bit of an offset, so that you can just drive it into a stick as the handle, and then at the little offset, the little Z of it, that would catch on the wood, and you'd be able to use that to force holes into this thick leather. And they're using elk. Now notice, he's not using the word elk and he means deer, because he said deer. So and they killed more elk on that trip than they killed deer. And the elk can have a, really thick skin compared to the deer. It depends on the season and all that good stuff. So.
Yeah, and they were some people were discussing whether there's still elk in the area. I think they were talking about them being reintroduced in different spots.
Well, I remember talking to Simeon, England, a year or two ago, and he said that he thought he heard elk.
Oh.
That they make a different kind of trumpety sound. Deer don't really make any noise at all.
A little bit of huff,
that's about it. So he thought, and I think they trumpet or do something kind of, a sound. Or it could have been Bigfoot.
You never know. So, it didn't sound like it happened this time when you were there, but it sounded like this doesn't happen to us, but that sometimes the storms will kind of pop up over the mountains when you weren't expecting them, and you're in a rainstorm when you thought it was going to be a great day.
Weather is very interesting in that spot. So here in Indiana, we don't have anything that stops our weather, and we don't have anything that really guides it. We don't have, sometimes you have weather that's created by cities or whatever that kind of, the weather adjusts itself because of the environment.
We get a little bit of lake effect snow.
Yeah, we get a little lake effect snow, but we're at the very just tippity-tip edge of where that happens. But in that area, because of the way those mountains create this sort of wall, the weather does weird things. Like it'll follow the mountain, or it'll specifically be drawn up the mountain because of the way warm air and the cool air interact with this environment. It does strange weather things, and I think that the weatherman in that area, they just have dice. It's just like, whatever, it's about the same. I mean, it'll rain today, it won't rain today. He's always right, because it's going to something weird is going to happen there. And we've been there when, it looks like it's going to be a storm and it isn't, and then it isn't, and it is. And so I pity the poor folks that have to live there and constantly put up with we've got fickle weather like anybody else, but not like that.
It was very funny, because before you guys had left, you were looking at the weather, and about 10 days out, it said it was going to rain every single day.
Yeah.
And then about 3 days out, it's like, nope, it's going to be 75 and no rain every day.
And guess what? It rained on us, but not very much. We had truly gorgeous weather. Sometimes it's very hot there. Probably not up in the mountains area, but it's funny that we had been going to that event for 7 or 8 years. Every year we say, isn't that beautiful? Wouldn't it be interesting to go climb up there? And yet we never said, wait, you can go climb up there. It's a stupid park with trails all over it. Why don't we go there? So this year, I don't know why, but it's like, hey, Ivy, why don't we go a day early and just, go on some of the trails?
Great idea.
It was the best idea I've had in a long time. I highly suggest visiting the park. It's not for the little kids. There are some places you can drive. There's Hensley Settlement, I haven't mentioned, which is a settlement of like a tiny town, basically. A family, tribal, a family setting of, 5 or 6 families sort of had log cabins there. They lived without electricity. But this was like in the late 19th century and early 20th century. It's not 18th century, but it might as well have been 18th century because that's the way they were living. So that's part of the park, and you can drive to it. But we didn't go there because it takes like almost an hour kind of drive around to finally get there. You can hike to it. Also, there are 80 miles of hiking trails, and there is one where that you go from one extreme edge to the park to the other, and it's like 62 miles across the top of these mountains. And it's a tremendous park, and I really suggest not driving by it. And even if you do have kids and you just want to drive by it for a minute, you can go to the visitors center, and then you can drive up to Pinnacle Overlook, as long as you don't mind driving up a mountain.
It gives you a lovely, it's the definition of a scenic route.
Right. And there is a primitive and an RV campground that's part of the park that you can reserve, and $18 a night or something. So there's a lot of stuff there. It's really neat.
Okay, I think I'm all caught up.
Okay, we're all caught up. So again, I want to thank all the folks that were at Martin Station, came to visit. I want to thank the folks that run the park and offer that site. It is, we think about events like at sites like that and think, well, that was cool. Why didn't they do this or that? Putting on an event is a big undertaking, and it's easy to complain about an event or a site or whatever and not really realize how much work goes into everything that happens there. So I super want to thank all those site folks and what they did and what they do, and the participants and all the people. Every year I try to go around and say hi to as many people as possible. If I missed you, I'm sorry, but it's always great to interact with everybody. Thank you, Lauren, for helping me today. Thank you, Will. And I hope you folks out there have a tremendous weekend. Thank you for watching today.
Thank you.